Hey folks, how's it going? Really excited to do a review of the talent builds for the Frost Mage as we jump into the Shadowlands Pre-Patch. So the things you probably want to know, ultimately there hasn't been a significant nerf or buff necessarily tied to Frost Mage. It's still probably up there with the go-to spec when it comes to leveling as we kick off the Shadowlands expansion. Ultimately, it's going to continue to honor the same rotation and mechanics that we've seen in BFA, so not a lot of material change there, although as we get exposure to conduits and legendaries, that will change. As it stands today, your top-end skill cap players can really stand out on Frost Mage. Its competitors, Fire, with the significant change that they've seen to their mastery ability, Fire is going to really fall from a competitive standpoint. And I'm actually really high on Arcane. I think Arcane is going to separate itself from the pack as a bit of a go-to. But I think ultimately that may rely on how smooth we get with that builder burner design that goes through so much mana. So with that being said, you're here to learn about Frost, and honestly, I think Frost is going to be a really steady, high control spec that you can use to manage large numbers of mobs. You can use it easily for questing. It's probably one of the more user-friendly mage specs, but there is certainly a lot of controls. So if you're new to the build, we'll kind of touch on a couple of the top end considerations and then a couple components as well that maybe you could potentially avoid. As far as the mage talent build goes, there's two that we're kind of prioritizing here entering Shadowlands. The first one is tied to what we're calling the Thermal Void build. So that's going with Lonely Winter. You're not going to have the Shadow Elemental with you. So that's the case for Tier 1. Tier 2 is Shimmer. The only difference with Shimmer in Shadowlands is that the actual cooldown is going up to 25 seconds from 20. Rune of Power is still a fantastic go-to in Tier 3. If you're completely new to how the spec works, you could go with Incanter's Flow. It's one less button you have to necessarily think about. But ultimately, Rune of Power gives you that 40% damage buff when you're able to stand within it on a 45-second cooldown. So if you're raiding, or even necessarily if you're bringing this build to Mythic Plus, I think that's going to be a competitive choice. Looking at Tier 4, Chain Reaction is how you want to roll. You could have a solid replacement with Frozen Touch, so consider that as well. That's a little bit of a swing depending on how things play out in pre-patch. But if you go with this build, it fits incredibly well with the Vision of Perfection Major Essence if you're already sitting on that right now. So hopefully you've got that and that you're able to capitalize with this build while essences are still available. Following this, Tier 5 is all about utility, but I prefer Ring of Frost, just being able to control, incapacitate mobs chase me down. That never hurt my feelings before, and it won't still to this day. Tier 6, you're going to go with Splitting Ice, just the buff of damage to your Ice Lance and Icicles. And then finally, Tier 7 is going to be the Thermal Void. So your Ice Lance, your Icy Vein duration, essentially just getting buffed by 10 seconds, so giving you a little bit more of a focused impact time here. All right, so that's cool. That's a really pretty straightforward build. You can bring that again into Mythic Plus or into raid builds. Alternatively, you can go with a Glacial Spike build. This build, it's actually going pretty similar to where we were when we actually started BFA. So you're going to rely on big Glacial Spike attacks, and honestly, with where most people should be at from a gear perspective, we should all necessarily have the appropriate Azurite gear to be able to help us out, assuming you've got the freeze trait that's kind of required here to buff this up. That talent will absolutely drop off once the full Shadowland expansion kicks off and we're out of the pre-patch. So this may be kind of the go-to spec, but only for the next, well, I'm hoping only 3 or 4 weeks. But we'll still sit on the edge of our seat to see what Blizz is going to tell us for the release date. All right, so back to the Glacial Spike build. Tier 1, you're going to go with Bone Chilling, which, hey, nothing wrong with that. Let's get our Water Elemental back to us. Tier 2, stick with Shimmer. Tier 3, Rune of Power, no change. Tier 4, you're going to bring back Ebon Bolt, which is a heavy hitter, absolutely. And gaining the Brain Freeze proc makes a huge difference. Tier 5 again is utility, so for me it's Ring of Frost in most cases, although Ice Ward can actually find a little bit of utility here as well. Tier 6, stick with Splitting Ice, no changes there. But Tier 7, this is the big difference here. You're going to bring Glacial Spike and incorporate that back in as kind of one of your major cooldown hammers to necessarily burn down the enemies that you're facing. So that's kind of the build. I've had a lot of fun in Glacial Spike. That's probably where I started in BFA early in the year, and I actually enjoyed that quite a bit. I also prefer having a water elemental. Like, that's just a sentimental aspect for me. So yeah, so kind of reflect on that. If you're wondering about what your stats should look like, prioritize intellect over everything always. Get your crit up to 33%, and then after that, you're prioritizing verse or haste interchangeably. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of the build. I think overall, like I was saying earlier, Frost Mage is going to be competitive. I don't think it's set up to be the meta right now, but if you're a talented player or you're even familiar with what the mechanics are, you should be able to do totally fine. This isn't going to be below average DPS from this spec. So that's everything that I touched on really quick, folks. Let me know, are you still planning on rolling with Frost for the expansion? Are you thinking about maybe taking a gamble to see what this new arcane build is going to be, or maybe it's a time to level up a new tune, because we did see that leveling got squished pretty quick. And hey, I don't know if you've experienced it yet, but it is fast. It's actually really exciting to be able to run just a few dungeons and be able to cover a lot more real estate than you would have had to previously. So kudos to Blizz and company for absolutely getting that right. Let me know in the comments, folks. Do you have any questions around our new abilities, about the AoE target caps, around like any kind of gameplay changes or the global cooldown changes that we've seen? Yeah, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what I can be doing better here. And thanks for taking the time to check out the vid. I hope it was helpful, and we'll see you soon. See ya.